everyone for having me here. I've got a couple of tough acts to follow. And thank you, Kara, for inviting me here, and to FISIG for putting this on. I myself was a FISIG a couple of years ago. Not here, but over at Canisius. But as Kara mentioned, I'm on the board of the Association for Research of Childhood Cancer, or AROCC. It's a local organization, 100% volunteers, and we focus on raising funds for pediatric cancer, like Talia had mentioned. It's a very deeply personal cause to me, and I'm here today to share my story with you, and a little bit about AROCC and how you can get involved. Before I talk about AROCC, I want to go back 25 years to tell you the story of a 5-year-old girl through the eyes of her 10-year-old sister. I'm one of 5 children. I have 2 older brothers, Matt and Billy. My brother Billy's here with us today. And I was the first girl, so for 5 years, I got to be the only girl. And then my little sister Annie came along. And shortly after Annie was born, my little brother Aaron came along too. We're like any crazy family of 5 kids. Lots of big family holidays together, lots of fun. Some would even say we put the fun in dysfunction. So it was the summer of 1987, and it was like any other summer. We were outside, playing in the neighborhood. My parents have a really big backyard, so we had a pool and a swing set. My little sister Annie loved to ride her bike and swim and play with her best friend down the street. And it was August of that year. It was right before Labor Day, and her eye was crossing. So my father took her to the eye doctor, and she was diagnosed with a lazy eye. Lazy eye, you get glasses. It's easy. You can still swim, you can play, you can ride your bike, and hey, I can make fun of my little sister. 4 eyes. But unfortunately, it wasn't that simple. That weekend, it was the weekend before school would have started, she fell off of the swing set, and she couldn't get back up. She lost her balance, she was having trouble walking. So my mother called local pediatrician, Dr. Beyer, and he said it didn't seem to be terribly urgent and to bring her into the emergency room the next day. I can only imagine what my parents must have been going through that night, just worrying. So they took her to the hospital the next day, and Dr. Beyer did some neuro tests, and he knew that something was really wrong. So they sent her up to Buffalo Children's Hospital in an ambulance with my parents, and they waited there all day long, and finally at the end of the day, she got an MRI. They had to stay there overnight, unfortunately, because they couldn't get the results until the next day. The next day, Dr. Patricia Duffner from the hospital, she was a pediatric neurologist, gave my parents the horrible news. My little sister was diagnosed with a brain tumor. So my parents had to comprehend the incomprehensible. They were told that she had a 10% chance of living for more than 5 years. Pretty bleak. So they had to figure out how to tell all of us kids. So I mentioned that it was Labor Day weekend, so I was going to be starting school. My brothers and I were going back to school, and I thought I was going to luckily be able to spend the night at my best friend's house the night before school started, which is pretty uncommon for a school night, but things were a little different with my parents being up at the hospital. That sleepover never got to happen. My father was up at the hospital with Annie, who wasn't going to start her first day of kindergarten the next day. And I came home, the house was really dim and quiet, which for a house of 5 kids never happens. And my mother sat us down, and she told us that Annie had a brain tumor. Lazy eye. I knew what that was. Brain tumor. I wasn't quite sure exactly what it was, but I knew that it had to be bad because they were up in the hospital. I don't really remember much else from that conversation until I heard the word cancer. And then I knew that it was really bad and that our lives were going to be forever changed. I didn't know it at the time when I was 10, but I found out years later that the type of brain tumor my sister had, was a pontine glioma. It's a brain tumor that's in the base of your brain in the pons, which is responsible for your vital bodily functions, breathing, swallowing, facial movement. So it was kind of obvious, with the symptoms that that's obviously what it was. Pediatric cancer is usually treated through one of 3 therapies. So it's either radiation, chemotherapy, and/or surgery. And it's usually best done at a childhood cancer center because they know how to meet the needs of a child rather than treating them the same way that they would be treated as an adult. So my sister couldn't have been better cared for. We have Roswell Park in our backyard and Children's Hospital. The specific treatment that my sister had to have was radiation therapy. So it was 2 treatments a day for 40 days. So my parents were back and forth to the hospital for 6 weeks. You know, obviously it was very difficult not having my parents around, but we were pretty lucky. We had a really great, strong family network. We spent a lot of time at my Aunt Stacy and Uncle Dave's house and staying with them and their already 5 children. And it was a huge relief for my parents to know that we were all being taken care of while they were focusing on taking care of her. But of course it was really hard to not have my parents around and to not be at home and to also not to be able to be with my sister and experiencing what she was going through. So I remember asking my mom if I could go up to treatment with her one day. So I went up to Caswell, and I think what I remember most about it was just how great of a disposition my little sister had. She was absolutely amazing, and all of the nurses just adored her. And, the thing that resonated most with me from that Tuesday in September of 1987 was that my sister wasn't afraid. She walked into radiation treatment with the strength of the Greek god Zeus. She was such a remarkable little 5-year-old, and I'm honored to have known her. After her radiation treatment was done, her brain tumor had reduced in size, but unfortunately she really wasn't getting any better. Surgery wasn't an option because the brain tumor goes through the entire brainstem, so you can't remove it. My parents had discussed cisplatin, or chemotherapy, with the doctor, but since it's really not effective on this type of cancer, that wasn't pursued any further. So there was no more treatment for my sister other than to keep her quality of life as best as possible for what life she would have left. She was on Decadron, which is a steroid to help with the brainstem swelling, and it did help her. She was able to walk. Without the Decadron, she wasn't able to walk. So she was able to get to that first day of kindergarten, and just like the nurses, everyone at school loved her. And she loved going to school. And she had a teacher who was wonderful and compassionate and gave her 6 short weeks of normal at a time when all she really needed was normal. It was Christmas time that year that she was diagnosed, and unfortunately she just wasn't getting any better. She had trouble swallowing, couldn't barely walk. My mother explained it to me as if she had had a stroke. She had the symptoms as if she'd had a stroke. So she was admitted into the hospital right before Christmas, and she had to have a feeding tube put in. It was a different Christmas that year. We went to visit her on Christmas Eve up at Roswell Park, and I just remember going in. I gave her jelly bracelets for Christmas that year, and she was just that same strong, beautiful little girl, though. She really just wasn't afraid. She was facing the unknown with such amazing courage. Something that, you can't imagine a 6-year-old could do. She was able to come home, and we celebrated her 6th birthday in the new year on January 3rd. Unfortunately, after that, she progressively got worse. In February of that year, she had a seizure, and she went into a coma. It was at the same time that she went into a coma that my brothers and I all got the chicken pox. So my parents took her home from the hospital. They put a hospital bed in their bedroom. My mother's a nurse, so she couldn't have been better cared for. And they took care of her at home. But while we had the chicken pox, we went to my aunt and uncle's house because she was very susceptible to infection, and any infection could unfortunately kill her. And we wanted her to live. So I stayed at my aunt and uncle's house until April, right before Easter of that year. And when I got to go home, I was so excited to be with Annie. There was no cure for what she had, no treatment that was going to save her life, but every day with her was a gift. I used to talk to her every day, and sometimes I'd lay in her hospital bed with her. And for anyone who knows anyone who's ever been in a coma, you know that they can hear you. It was April 23rd of that year I remember it as a really sunny day. My mother just recently told me that it was actually raining in the morning, but I guess I'd like to remember that it was a sunny day. And I went to my best friend's house, that same best friend who I was with on the day I learned that my sister was diagnosed with cancer. Just doing the normal things that a kid does. We were outside rolling our bikes and rollerblading, and her father came out and told me that I had to go home immediately because my mom needed me. So I went home and I remember riding my bike and just thinking, I hope my Aunt Stacy's car's in the driveway. I hope my Aunt Stacy's car is in the driveway. Because that meant that my sister had to go to the hospital and she was just coming to pick us up to take us to her house. When I pulled up the street, my aunt's car wasn't in the driveway, and I knew. On April 23rd, 1988, my 6-year-old sister, Ann Elizabeth Jeanette Caswell, excuse me, died of cancer 7 months after she was diagnosed with a terrible disease. It was an extremely difficult time for all of us. My brothers and I went to a grief support group called Storm Clouds and Rainbows, and my parents were in a grief group as well. And I just remember how difficult it was. And honestly, 25 years later, it still doesn't get any easier. You just really learn to live how to deal with it. I once asked my mother how it was that she got through the grief. How it is that she got up every single day to take care of us. Because honestly, that's the only reason she did get up, was to take care of my brothers and I after my sister passed away. And she said she just tries to do something nice every day for somebody else, to make a difference in their lives, and to make a difference for Annie. And that's what brings me to the second part of my story, which is the Association for the Research of Childhood Cancer. AROCC is a local homegrown organization. It's 100% volunteer, whose mission is to strive to fight against childhood cancer so that one day we can give our children of today a tomorrow and our children of tomorrow a future. So AROCC is specifically focused on funding for research so that families like mine don't have to go through what we went through. They specifically focus on seed grants so that researchers can get initial findings so that they can seek larger funding. While larger funding comes from national cancer organizations, AROCC complements that funding specifically, and we've been credited with getting some critical research off the ground that's been really important in the fight against childhood cancer. Childhood cancer strikes without rhyme or reason, and it's devastating to the families that it impacts. So we really are striving to make a difference. And to help you understand a little bit more about cancer and why the work that we do is so important, I just want to do a little bit of cancer by numbers with you. Sorry about that. Okay, so cancer is the #1 disease killer of children. One child will be diagnosed with cancer about every 45 minutes. It's about 13,000 kids a year. 1 in every 5 will sadly die from cancer. It's about 1,400 a year. There's 25 different types of pediatric cancer, which all require their own distinct research. Leukemia represents the largest diagnoses of cancer, which is about 34%, and then brain cancers and other nervous systems, which is what my sister had, represents about 27% of cancer diagnoses in children. On a really positive side, the survival rate has increased significantly over the past few decades. So it's gone from 20% to 80%. And that's a really great story for us to be telling. And it's because of work like that AROCC is doing that's helping us to get survival rates like that. But we still have such a long way to go. And that's mostly because 2/3 of all children, survivors of pediatric cancer, will suffer from some very horrible side effects. Heart damage, lung damage, hepatitis, impaired cognitive abilities, social impact. It's pretty horrible. So that's why AROCC. So AROCC itself was started by parents of children in 1971 who had cancer. They were connected by a very common but tragic bond. They were together through all of the treatment, the remissions, and the horrible side effects that I just mentioned. But they got involved because they, like me, wanted to make a difference. And that's why I got involved. So let me talk a little bit about that. My mother had gotten a pamphlet from AROCC, from Roswell, when she was up there. It was made by AROCC, and it was a guide for parents with kids with cancer. So she'd known about the organization, and the Christmas after my sister passed away, my aunt suggested to my mother that they make Christmas holiday decorations. So they stuffed turkeys and cornucopias and Christmas tree wreaths, and from humble beginnings, they raised $3,000 and donated it to AROCC the Christmas after my sister passed away. In the support group that my mother was in, she'd also met a woman who was involved with AROCC, and she invited my mom to get involved with the golf tournament that they hold. And so she got involved, and since then she joined the board. She's the reporting secretary for AROCC. And over the years I would be involved here and there, and I then started getting more actively involved. The president of AROCC, who's here with us today, Ann O'Donnell, just reminded me about the first event I really got involved with, which was called the Day in the Country. It was held out at Seymour Knox's estate. I don't know if you guys know, he used to own the Sabres. You might be a little young for that. But it was a day in the country, and people toured their home and made donations, and it was a great event, one of the great events that AROCC has put on over the years. But that's when I really got involved, and I truly started to understand how important this cause was, and just about getting involved. So you wonder how an organization as small as AROCC, it's homegrown, it's 100% volunteer, how it is successful. And really the answer to that, as our president Ann has said, it's simply a story about involvement. So how can you get involved? There's always an ask, right? There's a lot of different events that AROCC puts on. We put on a rock and roll dance, usually in the early part of the year. We have a 5K run walk. There's a golf tournament. Tri-5 puts on a car show. All just great events that are happening in the area that we need volunteers for. We need people to help us make that happen. We also have a Holiday Hero campaign that's going on right now. One of the sponsors is Mark Levy. You might know him. Coach of the Buffalo Bills. But that's really just an annual fundraising campaign to raise money and raise awareness. I myself am personally vested in getting awareness of AROCC through social media. You can like us on Facebook. And really I'm just here today to get you guys involved if you're willing to get involved. Everyone's got a pamphlet. They should have gotten a pamphlet for AROCC. If anyone is interested in getting involved and helping out, you can fill out that form and just leave it with me. There's pens, or if you need a pen, there's pens around. Because we'd love your involvement. We're an organization that I said was started in 1971. We need some youth. We need some young people to really help us out and move things forward. And I hope that the story that I told you about the loss of my sister can resonate with you. And that maybe you too will want to get involved. The work that I do with AROCC is Annie's legacy. I want to leave you with a quote that means a great deal to me. The quote is by Dr. James T. Grace, and he said, "If I had my choice between a moonwalk and the life of one child with cancer, I would never glance upward." Thanks for having me.